What do you think would happen to you if you wrote a letter to the Pope? Well, our guest today wrote a letter to the Pope. Stand by and see what happened. Our guest today is Dr. Jennifer Wortham, Doctor of Public Health. She was affected by the sex abuse scandals in the church and now is working in close contact with other people who are doing research and trying to find ways to clinically help those affected. And she wrote a letter to Pope Francis about this problem, and was invited to the Vatican to meet with him, and subsequently invited back to the Vatican to work with researchers and theologians on the same problem. She's traveling in pretty fast company. Jennifer, so nice to have you with us today.
Thank you.
To talk about something that is really on the top of the list of a lot of people who become disenfranchised because of what has been going on, swept under the rug, and continues to be a problem.
Yeah.
I suppose, and I hope it's not too painful to talk about your personal experience with sexual child abuse by clergy.
Well, I think I want to speak about what happened and how I dealt with it and how my family dealt with it and where we're at today. And it's been a very interesting journey to work through this over the past few decades. The last couple of years in particular have been very interesting. So when I was in my early to mid-20s, we discovered that both of my brothers had been molested by our parish priest. And it was a shock. My family was devoutly Catholic. My grandmother and I sewed altar cloths and vestments for the priests. We cooked for the priest and took dinner to the rectory a couple of nights a week. Every Saturday night we had any priests that were in town over to my grandparents' home for dinner. And they would play cards and drink bourbon and smoke cigars and enjoy life. And so I had a very unconventional experience, whereas many people may not realize that priests are real people and they're humans, and they do like to go to gatherings and celebrate life. And then we had the devoutness of my grandmother, who sang in the choir and prayed and went to Mass almost every day. Every wall in our house had a picture of Christ or Mary or a statue or some type of image. So the church was very much a part of our lives. And so when we found out about what had happened to my brothers, and it was a priest that was very close to the family, it was the parish priest, it was pretty devastating. And I personally felt deeply betrayed because I had such a strong faith and a belief, and it was very difficult for me to believe that this had happened to my family. And it's a long story, and it's in the book, so I'm not going to ruin the whole story for you now. But I left the church, and my mother also left the church. And I still was a very spiritual person. I had a deep belief in God. I explored many other faiths and went to Jewish temple. I went to and stayed in an ashram for 2 years part-time. I was seeking my home, my spiritual home. And it was a great journey. I learned a lot. I read a lot of books about religion and different faiths. I met a lot of wonderful people of different faiths, but I never kind of felt at home. And a couple years ago, I had a very challenging experience in my personal life, and for some reason I was called to church to pray about it. And normally, as I was growing up, if I had difficult experience, I would go to my grandmother, but she's since passed away. And for some reason, I thought the church would help me be close to her and that I could get some kind of guidance.
What a blessing she must have been to you through your early life and through this experience.
She was German, very strong German.
Interesting.
She was. She grew up with 5 brothers and sisters and went to Catholic school. And, you know, I found recently amongst the things that we kept from her after her passing, a book of her prayer cards. And I remember the prayer cards. I remember every night that she pulled them out, and sometimes I would sit with her and she said prayers and looked at each one. I did not remember that many of the prayer cards were actually kind of commemorations of ordinations and celebrations of ordinations of priests.
I remember my godmother, a single woman who had been in ill health when I first met her, and continued on real feisty. My side of the family is pretty feisty from my grandmother on down. And at one point, I was talking about the lyrics to a Marian hymn, "O Mary, we crown thee with blossoms today." And she sent me a book of Marian poems, which I treasured to this day.
It's amazing what our ancestors can bring to us.
Yeah.
But I went to church to pray, and I had a very moving experience. I actually forgave everyone that was involved in what I was currently experiencing, and I forgave the church. I felt I was home, and while I was praying and seeking guidance, I heard the words "have mercy," that I was to have mercy, and that really drove me to forgive. And it was a very joyful moment, and I was able to resolve the situation that I was experiencing. And I went back to church a few weeks later, and at that time I was really completely free. I had the opportunity to really go anywhere, do anything I wanted to do. And so I was saying the rosary again, and I had a calling to be a sister. And I thought, wow, that's interesting. I had not been around a sister or a nun in probably 30 years. And so, and the words mercy came to me again, Sisters of Mercy. And so the next day I filled out an application, and I was going to be a nun. And I had to tell my mother. And so my mother was still very angry with the church and had not resolved her feelings. And so we met, and I explained, you know, what had happened and what my journey had been, and that I had felt like I had come home again, coming back to the church. And it was difficult at first because the experience was still deep in her heart, very painful, what happened to her boys. But then she, you know, did something unexpected, and she really encouraged me. And about a few weeks later, I received a letter back from the Sisters of Mercy, and they said I was too old. I was past the age of discernment. And I thought, oh my goodness, what am I supposed to do with this? You know, I had this, what I felt was a very strong calling, and so I had some more research to do. And they said in their letter, they gave me a link to a website, and they said that that I could look for an order for older women. And my mother and I chuckled about that because my mom did not see me in that stage of life yet.
We don't see a lot of late vocations, I don't think, in the sisterhood.
My calling was really one of wanting to help others to reconnect with faith and God and work through forgiveness. So my whole journey was about really forgiveness.
And I think that is one of the hardest things that a person can do faced with a traumatic experience as you did. But that reconciliation is not only for you, but it's for the perpetrator.
It is. And in this case, the church carried a heavy burden for what happened because it really, the experience and the way the church responded when we reported it was just a deep betrayal again. And my grandparents, both of them, were really deeply hurt. And so it had a devastating impact on my family. And
What about on your brothers?
Well, my brothers, of course, their lives were fairly destroyed, and they've struggled all their lives. Both of them still struggle to this day. They have a lot of emotional challenges, and neither of them ever really achieved their potential. As what happens with this kind of abuse, it really affects the individual's self-esteem, and it makes it just very difficult for them to reconcile. But you know, I pray for them, and I think they were surprised. They didn't know I was writing a book, and they felt it brought us all closer. They didn't realize how well I understood their pain, and how much I knew about what they'd experienced.
I was reading your resume and I was surprised to learn that public health has a special category. Mm-hmm. It's so widespread that they have a special category to study and research and try to do something about it.
Yeah, so I think the blessing to be able to meet Pope Francis and to although it was a brief meeting, I really wanted to see in his eyes that he really did want to transform the church, and I'll segue back to the moment that I found the bird's nest that is on the cover of my book. And this is actually not the actual nest. He has the nest, and I don't have a picture of it. But I found the bird's nest. I found two of them the same day and gave one of them to a friend of mine, and the other sat on a credenza in my living room. And I was just relaxing one afternoon and reading a book, and looked up, and all of a sudden I had this vision that I was handing this nest to the Pope. And wow, where did that come from? I had no idea.
I've had an occasion to meet a Pope.
Yeah, I had no idea how I was going to get to the Pope, or how does one get to the Pope. But that I had this vision. It was as clear as day that I was handing this to the Pope. And,
that's amazing.
And so I sat with it for several months and decided I got to go to Rome. Took my brother to Rome for the holiday.
I had occasion to meet John Paul II at a visit to Benelux. I was covering that for a Catholic station.
Yeah.
And it was great. Short, he took my hand, looked me right in the eyes, and he smiled.
Yeah.
And that was like the sun just came out. We'll be back with Doctor in just a few minutes to talk about what it's like to be sitting there talking to the Pope. I'm going to wait for that.
There are times we are joyful and happy. There are also times when we are sad and depressed. Sometimes we laugh, sometimes we cry. Sometimes we become angry. Sometimes we are calm and reflective. Yes, we are emotional people. Often we express our emotions loud and clear, but sometimes we suppress and keep them to ourselves. Our wounded emotions need to be healed to enable us to live normally. We want to offer you a book written by Father Martin Padovani, SVD. It is called Healing Wounded Emotions. Father Martin is a marriage counselor, and this book is the result of his many years of experience. Some of the topics he deals with in this book are anger with other people, anger with ourselves, and even anger with God. But what about forgiveness? Forgiveness of someone that has hurt us, and even forgiveness of ourselves. Then there is the emotion of depression. We know that today there are many who are living with the shadow of depression, and they do not know how to get out of it. Father Martin gives practical solutions to deal with our wounded emotions. So get your copy today. Surely you will be doing yourself a favor. Or maybe you know someone who needs a copy.
Call the number on the screen or email us. You can also get it through our website. Know your emotions and live them to the full. This book will surely give you the peace that you were looking for.
We're back with Jennifer Wortham, a doctor in public health. We've been talking about abuse in the Catholic Church by clergy. She's experienced things of that nature in her own family, which caused a separation from the church and then her reconciliation, and having an opportunity to talk with the Pope about this problem. So the church gets this letter from the Pope, and this is available on Amazon, by the way. I can just not see myself ever writing a letter to the Pope.
You know,
Maybe an archbishop or something like that. But what's the significance, the keeper of the nest?
Well, all right. So, so the letter was something that just just kind of poured out of me, and it ended up being 6 pages long. And I faxed to the Pope's office, and about 2 days later, I got the reply that I was invited to the General Assembly, and I'd have an opportunity to meet the Pope.
How did that make you feel?
I had no idea what the protocol was. I had no idea of what to expect, but I was very excited. But it's also something deep inside that I was called to do, and I knew that somehow I knew that I was going to have that moment. It may be presumptuous, but it was something I knew was important to do. And so traveled to Rome with the bird's nest in a little box. And arrived and met my brother there. I had sent him ahead of time, and we made our way to the Vatican, and I presented the nest to the Pope. And at the time, I didn't understand the significance of the nest. I really, I knew I was supposed to give it to him. I didn't really understand it. There's a letter that accompanied the nest. And in the letter, again, it talks about the words that came to me, and the gift actually was called His Love Springs Eternal. So the nest was placed upon a pedestal and of petrified wood. And I gave it to the Pope and had a wonderful chat, and came home and felt like there's something more I'm supposed to do. I wasn't sure what that was, but I felt this almost a burden, like a heavy burden, that I needed to do something more now about this issue. And a few months later, I wrote him another letter. I did not receive a reply from that one, but I didn't give up, and I continued on my journey of exploration and ended up meeting with Cardinal O'Malley, who is the Pope's, heads the Pope's Commission for the Protection of Minors. And I flew to Boston, and I met with him, and then I flew back again to the Vatican to meet with the staff. And I learned a great deal about what they're doing to address this problem. And I was really deeply moved. While I saw in Pope Francis' eyes how much he cared about this issue and how deeply touched and moved he was by my story, to see the work that the Vatican is doing for this issue, it took it to a whole new level for me. And I since talked with his commissioner that he appointed in the United States, Teresa Kettlecamp, who I've not yet had the opportunity to meet, but my conversations with her, I found her to be an amazing person. And what I've learned is the church has been working diligently for many years to try to eradicate and resolve this problem. And in the United States, there's been a dramatic decline in the last couple of decades.
Well, I'm glad to see somebody from Boston, my hometown, doing something to alleviate this problem.
Yeah, so and it even predates, the cardinal from the work that the Catholic bishops did in producing what they call the Dallas Charter. They've done a tremendous amount of work and continue to do a tremendous amount of work.
Tell me about the work that you did to prepare yourself to be put in this position.
Well, so I've now done a tremendous amount of research. I've reached out to experts in the field to gain understanding of what's been done, what the challenges are, the hurdles, and it really piqued the public health professional inside of me to say, what can we learn about this that can be used in other organizations and other churches? Because as you know, this is not just a Catholic problem.
No.
This is a global public health problem. Child abuse and sexual abuse is something that affects nearly every church. It affects schools.
We have that Elmer Gantry syndrome rearing its ugly head every once in a while.
Yeah, and so it's a really deeply troubling problem. I think the church has had more than its fair share of criticism, although it's deeply concerning to Catholics when something like this happens, we have to remember that the Catholic Church is an institution of people, and all people are sinners. And while I don't condone or excuse sexual abuse of children, it is something that that is a sin. That is something that we need to take seriously.
Who are some of the people that you have associated with in trying to make more complete identification of why and how?
Mm-hmm. So I met a number of people over the course of the last 2 years and have conversed with others. And there's a gentleman who has specialized in this area, Thomas Plant, who is at Santa Clara University. He's written 3 books on this topic, and he's spoken at many of the Catholic conferences. And I think his expertise and understanding and in-depth knowledge of this topic has really helped inform the church and help them come up with solutions. And then on the other side of the house is the piece around forgiveness and how do we forgive of people. And I found a gentleman named Everett Worthington who is one of the foremost experts on forgiveness in the world, and he's spoken in many different churches about the process of forgiveness. And so when you look at the current challenges that we have today, we have multiple levels of betrayal, and within the church we have work to do with all levels of the church. We have the clergy who have been betrayed by their brethren who have committed these crimes. We have church leaders who neglected to follow up appropriately. We have the children who are affected. We have the families of the children who are affected. And then we have the faithful who are questioning, how could this happen? And how could we ever trust again? Yeah. And so we have a lot of work to do. There have been documented false accusations as well. And I think, there's also, there's people who are exploiting and trying to, to use victims for their own personal gain in terms of, a lot, as you said, there's a lot of money in the system. And we need to ensure that there's a fair process of inquiry and that all individuals who are accused have the right to due process. And I speak to that in my book, that the church does have a right to due process, and so do the individuals who are accused. And it's important that we follow that as a society.
I cannot think of any greater, it'll be hard to find one falling from grace than to have this going on in the church.
It's tragic. And, when we really think about it at a deeper level, we're looking at a type of spiritual warfare that we need to guard ourselves against, to not let this kind of evil impact our bond with Christ and our faith. And so that's my work now, is to help people understand that this is evil, and for people who are questioning their faith or who have left the church, I think it's really important that they not let this issue break their bond with Christ. I think that
I got to thank you for taking on a problem that's very disturbing and must be full of heartbreak from the stories that you've heard. And I have to play Me Too. It wasn't the clergy. It was 3 sisters who served as my babysitters. And babysitters, they're supposed to sit with you, they're supposed to take care of you. And about that thing that, oh, well, it's not going to bother you for the rest of your life. Well, I can tell you, it's true. To this day.
To this day, it's still affecting you.
behaviors that I exhibited after those things. Might even be considered close to criminal.
Yeah. I think there are a lot of suffering in the world. I'm sorry
Tell
that
me what's in
happened
the
to you.
future. Going back to Rome?
You know, I know that I'm going to be working on this issue for a long time, and I think my most important message is one of hope, and hope for the future of the church. And you know, Pope Francis is going to get this fixed. I think God asked me to give the nest as a symbol that everyone should know that the Pope is the head of our church, and we need to support him in his work. It's a divine appointment, and he has made a commitment to this. And I'll close with something that probably touched my heart the most deeply.
Go ahead.
So my last trip to the Vatican, I got to meet the staff of the commission, and I had been to the Vatican a couple times, but it's a big place, and there are a lot of gates, and I was asked to meet the staff person at one of the gates. I went to the wrong gate, and I was really running late. I had to hustle to get around about 1,000 chairs to get to the right gate. And she waited patiently for me and took me through 3 more checkpoints and told me the history of the buildings as we're walking through. And she explained that their offices were in the old Vatican headquarters, that the Vatican had moved to a newer building, and she really almost apologized for the fact that this was an older building. And as we approached the building, she said, but Pope Francis wanted us close to him. And then she pointed to the building right next to the building where they were housed, and that was his home.
That's fantastic. Oh my!
So he visits them almost on a daily basis.
You are so privileged.
It
How many people
touched
can
me.
say that they've even seen him standing in Vatican Square?
So his home is right there next to the work that these people are doing, and that's how important this issue is to
God
them.
bless you. Thank you, Doctor, for being with us here today. If you've experienced anything like this, there is help, and you can find it. Pick up a picture of her book, A Letter to the Pope, which sort of explains what has being done and how, although you may have holding a grudge against the church, there is retribution and there is also reconciliation. Thank you for being with us today. Thanks for those who support us, and I'd like to see you again next time. God bless.
Thanks. Okay.